Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the South Gloucestershire Business Insight Show. And thank you for joining us this afternoon for this Visitor Economy live stream. I'm Steve Gardner-Collins. I'm Director of Visit Gloucestershire and Sales Director at the Hatton Collection. I'd like to invite the panel to introduce themselves, and I'll go around my screen. Craig, would you like to introduce yourself first?
Motion detected at the front door.
Hi everyone, I'm Craig Stoddart. I'm the Chief Exec of the Wave, which the world's first inland surf park with using the Wave Garden Cove technology, which opened in October 2019. Yeah, looking forward to getting open again, get some more surfing going.
Great, thanks Craig. Adam.
Hi everyone, I'm Adam Jones. I'm Marketing Manager of Aerospace Bristol, which is a museum on Filton Airfield, or the old Filton Airfield, home to the last Concorde ever to fly. I'm also Tourism Ambassador on the Chartered Institute of Marketing Southwest Regional Board.
Great, thanks Adam. Mike, you're next.
Oh, good afternoon. My name's Mike Solomon. I'm the Executive in charge of Tourism, Leisure, Arts and Culture for North Somerset.
Great, thanks Mike. And Jane, you're next on my screen.
Jane Marley, Museums and Heritage Officer, promoting museums and heritage in South Gloucestershire, providing advice and coordinating heritage projects across the council.
Great, thanks Jane. And Hannah, you've joined us as a guest today. Do you mind just telling everyone where you're from?
Yeah, certainly. I'm Hannah Dwyer from the Cheltenham Ladies College, and I run the Venues and Events department there.
Great, thanks Hannah, and thanks everyone for joining me on the panel. I'm just going to encourage anyone that's watching live with us that if you do have any questions, you can put those into the live stream and we'll pick those up, and if there are any questions, we'll hope to answer those throughout the session. Today's discussion is obviously around visitor economy, and we're really keen to talk about, as the sector looks to reopen, what we can expect from 2021, what we can expect to help businesses in terms of survival and in terms of recovery, and what perhaps we could look forward to in the future. I'm going to invite the panel to talk about their experience of the last year within their roles, and then we'll look to discuss the way forward in terms of the roadmap that's just been announced in the last week through to June. So if I open up to the panel again, Craig, how's the last year been for you in terms of the Wave?
Blimey, well, how do you sum up the last 12 months? It's been a proper roller coaster. You know, it was challenging enough just building the Wave and raising the money for it and doing something that's never been done before, to then open and within 3 months fall into this extremely unusual and very, very challenging environment has been unprecedented. I think we've been lucky, to be honest, and I think luck does play a big part in how you get through these things. Yeah, we had a really strong sort of start before COVID, and when we got shut down, we actually faced a really, really tricky position financially, because we'd only traded through the winter period, which is broadly a sort of loss-making period for us, and we're heading into the profitable period, sort of going into March, April last year, and we obviously didn't get that. And so, you know, it was proper squeaky bum time. We had to really hold on tight. We had to refinance the business last year. Thank God we were managed to open in August, and we had a really strong 3 months, August, September, October. And that would enable us to sort of prove the model and show that our projections in terms of visitor volumes and the demand for surfing and visiting our destination were really there. And we sort of closed a Sybil's refinance deal in October, and that's enabled us to sort of survive through this and be in a strong position going forward into 2021. But it's been a really challenging time, with a lot of highs and a lot of lows, but you know, we're strong, we're looking forward to the future. But you know, without the government support for furlough and the sort of Sybil's arrangements, and the rates the rates relief we've had, it would have been a very different story.
And can I ask, in terms of your refinancing, were you expecting to refinance back then to kind of still be in that kind of survival period now?
No, not at all. And to be honest, our shareholders supported us through the sort of first lockdown, and that was quite tight. But that wasn't we were never expecting to get heading back into it, and it was really the second lockdown, just before the second lockdown, which we firmed up a proper refinancing package that enables us to have the headroom for any further lockdowns that would come. And at that stage, the sort of perception of funders had changed, that they wanted to make sure there was enough resilience to survive what could be a very long pandemic and something that could affect us for not just a month or two, but many months. And that's turned out to be true. So I think everyone was taken by surprise. So when we first went into it, we thought maybe we'd sort of it wouldn't feel as bad as it turned out to be, but it's everyone has learned along the way. I think the idea that people knew what to do at the beginning is just not right. We were all learning as we went along, and the impact on our businesses and on the economy more generally just evolved through the process, and we had to adapt with that.
Yeah, definitely. I remember saying to a colleague, I'll see you at Easter. I think it's something that Boris said, we'll be fine by Easter. I remember saying to a colleague, see, I haven't seen them since. Still furloughed. Jane, how's the last year been for you in your role?
Yes, well, it's been quite topsy-turvy as well. I mean, first of all, I had to ring round and I was finding out that museums were closing, and then I was hoping they all would close, because it was safer. And then that sort of information continued, and I realized that I could actually lose contact with them. So I started doing a sort of heritage newsletter and a museum newsletter. Two were quite similar, which was useful because I began to research everything that was required that they would need to see, and sort of collate it into a newsletter once a week, and that has continued. Then I was promoting things like VE Day, so I had everything, up on the website, and then as it went up, after a while, as the pandemic went on, I had to take everything down, or the events went virtual, if you remember, because the council gave a lot of grants out for VE Day. And the same happened with Heritage Open Days, had a leaflet with venues and lots of events, and that ended up being much more than I expected. The lottery closed, but the Arts Council England opened a projects fund, so I started developing a new project with the museums called This Is Your Heritage South Gloucestershire Indian Stories, addressing inequalities in South Gloucestershire, and that was sent in last month. So we'll see what happens. But in terms of the museums in South Gloucestershire, you've got Durham Park National Trust, which is very large. As you know, they immediately opened their grounds after COVID struck, and then closed. And so, they've had, because they've got outside areas and inside areas, they've had an interesting time of it. Aerospace Bristol, I'll leave to Adam. Avon Valley Railway, which is our, those three are our largest visitor economy in a sense for tourism. They had to close, but they managed to keep their cafe open most of the time and do takeaways. And then they did open for Christmas for train rides, and earlier in the season as well when it was allowed. The other museums are mainly voluntary run. Kingswood Heritage Museum, Frenchy Village Museum, Thornbury and District Museum, and they are run by volunteers with a strong community support and a grant from ourselves. So they closed, and Kingswood opened for a while because it's large, but the others are too small to open during, unless there aren't any dangers to the volunteers or the public. And the last one, Yate Heritage Centre, is run by Yate Town Council, but again is very small. So that's been my experience really, and a little about the museums in South Gloucestershire.
Okay, thanks, Jim. I described the last year visitor economy earlier as a wave, so excuse the pun, but it was in a session that was recorded, so you might watch it and see it. But it was definitely it's definitely been like this, and it sounds like so far for the two so far, it's definitely been a roller coaster of a ride. Mike, how's the last year been for you?
Well, like everybody else, it's been uncertainty and working with government advice that changes on a regular basis. We have 3 major seaside resorts. We've got Weston-super-Mare, the biggest. We've got Clevedon and Portishead. They've obviously suffered, especially the hospitality, in as much as the government has given real support to the hospitality industry, but it still hasn't really been enough, because they've gone through this topsy-turvy, as someone else said, period where they open, they close, and when an event, say the pier, for instance, Western Pier, they need quite a lot of time to prepare to reopen. So when they're told they can reopen, it doesn't necessarily mean next week they can reopen. There's a lot of organisation. There's bringing staff off furlough. And then you've got the events. I mean, we had so many events organised throughout the three major towns and some of the smaller towns. And of course, we could only go ahead with any of the essential food events and 1 or 2 of the others. And you're open for criticism whichever way you go. So if you open the event, you're open for criticism that you shouldn't have opened the event. If you close and don't run the event, you're open for criticism on that. Also, future events. I mean, even going into next year and the year after, because of the organisation, because of the money that needs to come in to fund these, you've also got to think about the closure of these events. And this week I had to make a decision to cancel one of our major events, which I can't tell you which one it is yet, because it'll only go out late Friday. But it was a decision that is a very difficult decision to make, because the knock-on effect is not just, it's for lots and lots of people. It's all the concessions that would be there. It's the hospitality industry that would benefit from thousands of people coming into the towns. So it's been very, very difficult. Also, you're open to criticism when you've got hundreds and maybe thousands of people on your seafront on a sunny day. And yet you have people that live in high-rise flats with no outside area, with little children, and it's a sunny day and they're not breaking the law by going out, so they want to go to the seaside. So yes, it's been a difficult 12 months, I think, for everybody.
And it's everyone's individual experience, isn't it? As you say, with those people who do live in high-rise with no garden space, when they do get the nice weather, they need somewhere to be able to go and get that outlook of the blue sky and the green grass, because if they haven't got it at home,
it's
mental health
issue. And I think people are getting lockdown fever. They really are. The more people I speak to, when we opened the last time, it was so busy. I mean, people were coming out in their droves. So you're open to criticism for that. And also what we found as well, that the visitor spend was going up per head, because people had more money in their pocket because they hadn't been spending. So yes, we did find that.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Great overview of your last year. Adam, how's the museum been?
Yeah, I echo particularly what Craig said, really, in that I suppose we were in a similar-ish position in that we were also relatively new. We only opened in October 2017, so we've been open about 2.5 years at the point that we had to close. And since that point, as we now know that we won't be opening before mid-May at the earliest, that means that we're going to have been closed for 11 out of the last 14 months, because we were only able to reopen August, September and October. Certainly in the earlier months of the pandemic, I think it's definitely fair to say that the museum was in a perilous position, very uncertain future. There was a lot of doubt from month to month surrounding how we were going to keep the museum funded. Obviously, on the visitor side, the visitor numbers completely went away. But as Mike mentioned about events as well, you know, a huge source of income for us is having events under Concord, evening events, conferences, meetings, all of that. And all of that side of the business went away as well, of course. So yeah, it's been a hugely challenging year, very difficult for many of our staff as well. Like other than that 3-month period when we reopened, we've had some staff that have been furloughed for the entire time. So who, you know, other than that 3 months, basically we've not really seen, haven't been in contact, haven't been into the museum much since March of 2020. Things obviously picked up, at least on a kind of from a financial point of view, when we got the National Lottery Heritage Emergency Funding. I think that was 250k. We then got cultural recovery funding, around £500,000 in the first round of that, and we've applied for the second round. So that's put us on a much firmer footing. But until that point, as I say, it was just enormous uncertainty and a very difficult period, as it is for everyone.
Yeah, it's certainly been a tough time. I obviously have, as I've mentioned, hotels, and it mirrors exactly the same experience. Great summer when we were able to trade last year, but I was saying in an interview earlier that what became more of a responsibility, particularly through the first lockdown as it kept going on and on and on, was HR. It was the well-being of our teams, not knowing when we were coming back to work. And with that, when you work in a bar or a restaurant, and you service rooms, you can't work from home. So you literally are just stuck at home with nothing to do. There were some colleagues that got second jobs, but again, because of that uncertainty, some people chose not to take jobs because they wanted to be able to come back as soon as they could. So a real limbo period. But I found definitely from a board level that our decisions around mental health and wellbeing of our teams, and we've got 160 staff across the group, and that became our big consideration after the first 4 or 5 weeks, was actually how are our staff, and we needed to start really looking after them from afar. That became a priority. A great summer, and accommodations throughout the area did really well during that period, and then the second lockdown, and then we were hopeful for Christmas, and then obviously we all closed on Boxing Day, and here we are still. So my next big question is, since we spoke and planned today, obviously we've had the roadmap announced, which is an interesting outlook through to June at least, and we've also had the Chancellor's budget announcements yesterday. So that kind of changes the direction slightly of the original questions I was going to have, but they're relative in terms of survive and thrive. I feel like we're still in a period of survival in our sector, and that comes with some further support. Is it enough? And I guess by going back round the room again, the outlook through to June, and then possibly every time we seem to see an extension of the furlough scheme, I worry because our sector seems to be the one that goes, we're closed again during that period. And I worry that this time around, going back to what Craig said earlier, and with the busy summers in a lot of places, if our sector doesn't get the July and August, it's going to obviously make what is usually a really challenging autumn-winter period even more of a challenge. And can people truly start to survive this? I don't know, will we be 4th, 5th time round? So Craig, back to you really. In terms of the roadmap ahead, when are you looking to reopen, and did the Chancellor's updates yesterday provide any reassurance for you in terms of survival? I wouldn't even mention the word thrive in our sector, but I have to. But what's your perspective since the roadmap and the Chancellor's update yesterday?
I think probably differently from a lot of people here, because we're an outside venue, that actually we're probably in a better place than a lot of hospitality and leisure businesses. So we're able to open in principle for the surfing and the outside with takeaway food and beverage from the 29th of March. So we will be opening on that date, subject to no further movement, but we'll wait and see. And then we've just actually launched our accommodation business. So we have 25 glamping units that sleep up to 8 people. Now, of course, we can't open those until middle of May, but we have launched the bookings for them, and they've been it's been very strong bookings. I think there's a real sort of pent-up demand for, and with this sort of concept that international travel is going to be difficult, people's holidays are going to be staycation in some form, and that's, driving some good pent-up demand. Whether we can actually trade properly, we're going to have to wait and see. It's going to be, we've had 150,000 people through our doors in the last year, and we've had 0 traces of COVID. So we know that the systems we put in place have been very effective, and we're confident that that will be the case going forward. Thankfully, being an outside venue, and the 2-meter distance works very well for surfing, because surfboards are about 2 meters long. It's quite difficult to to get much closer. It's overall, actually, it's difficult. It coming from a low base, I'm actually quite optimistic looking forward, and I think the vaccination has made the vaccination program has made a real difference to that sort of perception. And if it really does hold the pandemic at bay, then I think there's a lot of cash in the economy. It just hasn't got a place to go. And once those doors are open, I think it will come back quite strongly. I do worry if that we lose out on this summer, that what that does to the whole visitor economy. I think it's going to be really challenging for those seasonal businesses, particularly, because this is when you cover the cost for your entire year during this period. It's also, it's when the inbound tourism comes to the region as well. It's not just the local resident population, but there's enormous amounts of inbound tourism to this area, and that helps us all. And I really hope that is able to come. But overall, I'm generally sort of cautiously optimistic, I suppose I'd put it.
Yeah, your point about being open air actually is where you can share that optimism. We've certainly been able to open on the 29th of March, being well as well. That brings your year a lot further in than some of the restaurants and the pubs that can't open even in April. Yeah. And they're looking at May. The shortened season is the concern. But at least I suppose if you could get some cash flow going as early as March, you're 4 or 5 months ahead of the rest.
Yeah. Easter obviously is a very a really good trading period normally for visitor attractions, and it does enable us to get some of that trading, which is really good. I mean, we've got everyone, generally people book ahead with us, so we've got a pretty good view on what's coming. And although the lead times are much shorter than they were pre-COVID, we're pretty confident that they will come fast in as people get more confident and see things opening up. I think the demand will be there once. Let's just hope this carries on. The rates carry on dropping.
Cool, great, thanks, Craig. And for the rest of the room, it's more varied, isn't it? Jane, the outlook for you in your role in terms of your indoor predominantly. The gardens not so much actually, but the indoor facilities. Is there a map that's working for you? The dates?
Yes, there is a map. Just to say that Visit Britain, apparently we will only get back to the visitor spend pre-COVID 2019, 84% by the end of the year. So it's going to be really slow build up to even get to that point. So before that point, it will be under 84%. And, that is quite substantial, isn't it? Especially after a low trading year last year. So South Gloucestershire is really not so dependent on international inbound travel, which again is probably not the market to go for the first part of the year for places like Aerospace Bristol and Durham. The domestic markets are more important at this stage, and also for small community museums. I mean, generally between 8th of March and 29th of April in the sort of first stage, it'll be just as now really, where you'll have to pre-book a visit to Durham Park or and get a takeaway, and the same at Avon Valley Railway. From 29th of March, venues outside will be able to have working parties. For example, at Brandy Bottom, you know, you could have groups of 6 working outside preparing the sites for opening. And at Winterbourne Medieval Barn, maybe you could have outside, you know, groups of 6. From 12th of April, there isn't much change really as from 29th of March. You know, it's a similar situation. It's only really, in other words, it's if you've got outside part of your establishment, you're okay. You know, you can welcome people in. It's only really when you get to 17th of May that you can start to open up inside. And all this is dependent on the vaccination program, the variants, and all these other factors as well. Nothing is cast in stone, is it? However, I do feel optimistic that people will be dying to get out. I know that volunteers in my village are in South Gloucestershire are you know, really keen to get back to volunteering at Dinham Park and Laycock Abbey, and people want to go back to Aerospace Bristol, and staff want to come off furlough, and so people are really keen to get out and doing the things they were doing before and to make these visits. And as you said, many of them will have additional savings through not having been able to do anything, although of course some people will be worse off, so I think it's important to keep the concessions.
Yeah, balance. It's all about balance, isn't it, I think, at this stage?
Yeah.
Mike, how are you looking roadmap ahead from your perspective?
Yeah, roadmap ahead, mirroring quite a few things that are being said, is I'm cautiously optimistic, and I think the people that will suffer are wet pubs, for instance, that have no outside food at all. They're the ones that have suffered up to now, and I think we'll see suffering in the future. The outside events are going to be our saviour, I think, in a lot of ways. Where the more we can generate outside events, the better it's going to be. For those businesses that have been established for a long time in the hotel and catering sector, that have no borrowing, they've paid their mortgages off, they're the people that are more robust and can survive longer. However, the newly formed business that may have just formed last year or a year ago, just before COVID, they've taken out mortgages, borrowing, they're the ones that are going to be really struggling, and the people I'm really concerned for. Again, it's a mixture of things. I think people will come out and they'll start to use facilities, museums, outside restaurant, catering and pubs, if they feel safe and secure. And I think that's going to be an important thing going forward. I think the days of seeing places that were masses of people inside, shoulder to shoulder, those days are going to change, and which means that if you were depending on 1,000 people coming to your establishment and you're only going to have 300, something's going to suffer. You've got to put your prices up, or you've got to cut your stock. You've got to do something to help that. So that, I think, going forward, is we're going to see the numbers drop, but the spend go up, because I think people will pay that premium to be in a safe, secure environment and to have an experience, whether it be a playhouse, a museum, a restaurant, to have an experience where they feel comfortable and safe. So I feel optimistic for the future. But if things reverse in June, if the government suddenly comes out and says, I'm sorry, but we're going to have to now look at another 6 months of various tiers, that's when I think, if that happens, then we need to worry.
Thanks, Mike. Adam, the museum, roadmap ahead.
Yeah, similar to what other people have said, I would say cautiously optimistic. We're, as many people are, probably completing their budgeting process at the moment for 2021-22. And even with quite cautious visitor number forecasts. We're still, thanks to the furlough scheme and other support, able to make it through. As I say, we are being cautious. We're not forecasting a return to full visitor numbers until well into 2022. But the fortunate thing is that the furlough scheme gives us the flexibility to be able to handle that, really, and particularly things that we've done over the course of the last year when we were briefly able to reopen. For instance, some weeks we only opened 5 days. Some weeks during the school summer holidays we opened for the full week. That's the kind of flexibility that we're able to take advantage of through furlough to scale with demand, basically, because as people have said, nobody knows what that demand is going to be like. Looking back at those few months that we were open, overall, I think we were about 50% down. This is August, September, October last year. But within that, there were a few days, we had 1 or 2 days in August where we actually were up year on year, particularly rainy days, when people went to indoor attractions. But there is clearly that potential there. As we're talking about with the staycations and that boost to domestic tourism, there are reasons to think that if things do go according to the roadmap and turn to relative normality within, by the summer, then the numbers could be stronger than we expect. But we're not forecasting that. We're not taking that risk of assuming that everything's going to suddenly be back to normal, because obviously there's far from any guarantee of that. Outside of the general admissions, we're getting group inquiries now, which is promising. Again, they're for the summer onwards. Clearly, we could potentially start to get school visitors coming back, most likely from next academic year, September onwards. And on the event side of the business, we're starting to forecast a return of events again from September onwards. But clearly, as with everything, that will be particularly impacted by COVID restrictions. So clearly, social distancing, capacity limits, space coverings, all of that is going to determine how that events business returns and when. So yeah, I'd say the other things that we're doing is we have a few projects that we've continued to work on throughout the last year, so that we have new things to offer when we are able to reopen. So we're going to have a new conservation in action hangar where people will be able to see volunteers working on various aircraft. And we're developing a children's app to enhance the museum experience for younger visitors. So hopefully, the plan, or the hope, is that a combination of a relatively strong return and, as people say, generally people wanting to get out, visiting friends and family, looking for things to do, combined with some new things for them to enjoy, means that visitor numbers are quite strong. But we're taking a cautious approach.
Thanks, Adam. It's really interesting, isn't it? Because I tried to pick up on themes as people are talking, and something that came up on risk and resilience today was about preparing beyond kind of how do you write a business plan now for the next 3 to 5 years. Because quite seriously, that's what normally happens. Businesses write their forecasts and they want to look at how they'll, not just, the recovery has become a new word in the mix of a business plan, hasn't it? But businesses trying to think about the future. When we look at the 21st of June, the guidance actually moves away from wearing a face mask, sanitizers, social distancing. At the moment, that's how the guidance is mapped out. And I raised the point earlier in visitor economy settings that we're having to decide as we start to think about reopening, like, do we take the screens down from reception? Do we need to have all the ugly stuff that we kind of tolerated in our lovely country house environments and things of last year? What will become an expectation of some, and then others that won't want to? If the government doesn't say we have to, then there'll be visitors that say, well, I don't have to do it. I don't have to wash my hands every 20 minutes because I'm not being told to do it anymore. So I'm kind of working now towards, okay, so the roadmap goes to plan. We are We've got a furlough scheme that supports the flexi furlough working. It means businesses don't have to go back to paying salaries straight away on the full size. So we've got that kind of income balance going on. Adam, you just mentioned kind of innovation there, where we're looking at new experiences for younger people. And then obviously beyond the 21st of June, and we think of that as all going to plan. I just wondered what the room's feelings were around if guidance is pretty much as it stands at the moment. So we're going a bit cold turkey really for our industry. We've been closed for so long, opening and closing, following all the guidance. For the summer, I just wondered how you felt as an individual, because you'll naturally be a visitor if you go on holiday, but also the services that we offer to visitors, your perspective on the guidance. So we kind of, what can you expect from the summer? It's ultimately where we'll be trading. Visitors will be coming for an experience. And have you been able to put much thought, I guess, into that kind of post 21st of June, what you will and won't kind of change? And from your own perspective, what you want if you were a visitor? It's quite a few questions in one. I wasn't necessarily going to go around the room, but if anyone's got any opinion on that, that's certainly come up in risk and resilience today, but also when we're looking to reopen our businesses, how the roadmap dictates what the setup will be, what it doesn't have to be anymore. Anyone got any opinion on that?
One thing that I would say that we have found on a positive note is there are a couple of things that we've actually brought in that I could see being quite well received and staying. For instance, like everyone, we put arrows down on the floor, a route around the museum, and it's a really simple thing. But actually, I think clearly in the future, you're not going to have to necessarily, follow that one-way route in the same way as you had to during these restrictions. But actually, we got some quite positive feedback on it from visitors who preferred having their visit guided around a little bit more. The other thing that springs to mind is we launched At Home with Aerospace Bristol, so an At Home with basically a program of digital activities. So we started producing a lot more videos, activity sheets for kids and all that kind of stuff, and putting it on the website and social media. And that's, again, was well received. And the kind of thing that we'd not got around to doing before, but that actually now we don't want to stop doing that when we go just because the museum's open again. That's the kind of thing we want to carry on. So I'd say, clearly, I don't think anyone's going to be particularly keen to keep screens and hand sanitizer around, but there are one or two other things that actually we've learned from this that might benefit us in the future.
Yeah, that flow of customers. Oh, sorry, all spoke at once then. Mike, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I was just thinking we'll be governed quite a bit by public reaction, and we'll sense the mood once people start revisiting. And I think once we see that, we'll understand whether we do want to keep the screens up, we do want to keep the sanitation, the hand wash things. So I think the public will tell us, and quite quickly, what they want to see. So yeah, I think it's one of those things where until it happens, we can't guess ahead, but we're hoping that there'll be more money in their pockets and in people's pockets, in my pocket, and everybody else's, and they'll want to spend it somewhere.
Yeah, it was almost that business decision. You're trying to reopen, and you think about restaurants that have been on half capacity because they've socially distanced their tables. Can they now, when they're planning to reopen from the 21st of June, effectively just bring all their furniture back up from the cellar, and with a certain amount of distance, because I don't think we want to go to being a foot away in I remember being in Cafe Rouge and being a foot away from the person next to me. That's a bit too uncomfortable. But certainly businesses, when we talk about going back to normality, when the restaurants and the bars were like 3 tables in an entire bar in some cases, they need to be able to put their tables back out, and that effectively comes into place from June the 21st, so they can resume their capacities that they need desperately to survive again and thrive, because they can pack the place up, which is the idea of the restaurants, isn't it? So that's the kind of point I'm pushing there, is we've got all this lovely furniture in storage because of the last year, but can we actually bring it back up on the 21st, and that kind of be acceptable for people to sit next to each other again so closely? Craig, any thoughts from you on that point?
Yeah, I suppose I think this is, I think we're going to have the hangover from this for a while. The reality is, I think, as we go into next winter, there will be other cases that crop up, and I think we will have to learn to live as a society with, having periods where we're encouraged to wear face masks, encouraged to keep washing our hands, and certainly if you're ill, encouraged to not be wandering out in, and risking other people. So I actually think it's going to take a number of years before we get back to the sort of that dense socializing that we've had in the past. And we're going to have to adapt our models to try and work in the best possible way. Now, it may be that that's a sort of ebb and flow summer to winter, much like we are with flu. I think the change in the sort of chief medical advisor's words over the last couple of months has been really clear. It's moved from we're going to try and beat this to we're going to have to live with it. And I think we're going to have to live with it. And the vaccination is clearly part of helping us live with that. And I think there will be a level of discomfort in society for some time about being too close.
Yeah.
So it's difficult. It's difficult. And I think, some of those protections, you've got to think, we have certain, we have different, our staff are, we've got to look after our staff, and some of those things are really important for their protection. And, if we have to live with them, we'll have to live with them. Is the honest answer from me. And I don't think, we've got 165 covers in our restaurant. I'm not sure we're getting back to 165 covers that quickly. So, we have to adapt, and we've got, thankfully we've got sort of 60 acres. We can spread out and we can put up some temporary cover outside and allow more space. But a lot of hospitality businesses don't have that option.
No.
So it's really challenging, I think, for some businesses.
It is when you think about capacity and being able to resume, so that when the furlough scheme drops to, from 80 to 75 to 60 as the summer goes on, you're going to have to bring in more customers so that you can actually cover those growing costs that then become true costs potentially from October. And you'll need to resume capacity. Some of the traditional pub environments are very small throughout the county. Our rural destination lends itself to country pubs, and you are kind of hemmed in, aren't you, when it comes to
Steve, I wonder how many of us here
going into those sorts of environments. The theatre was another example.
Steve, I was wondering how many of us here as well depend on conferences, because the numbers for those are going to drop by 50-60%. And with your hotel business, I'm not sure how much you will depend, and other people will depend on conferences and the numbers coming in from those.
Visitor economy and events is huge, isn't it? Adam, you mentioned events earlier. Again, it comes down to capacity issues. Effectively, from the 21st of June, you can resume normality. So, if you're going to a wedding, it will be a normal size wedding, 80 to 100 people. There's nothing to say it can't be at the moment in the guidance, and the venues that need to go back to that sort of measure in order to survive effectively can do through the summer. And that's where the kind of concerns come in around expectation and individual interpretation of the rules and the guidance and what we can and can't do, what people will feel comfortable with. And I think the risk to the sector is by making people feel uncomfortable, we risk getting reputations where people start to say on social media, for example, I was up there the other day, it was absolutely rammed, don't go, starts to damage the reputation of the businesses. Jane, obviously from your perspective, capacities will probably be an issue. Adam mentioned about arrows on the floor remaining. I think great for flow, because it's often difficult.
Yeah, I think it is all about confidence. It's confidence about the staff and volunteers and management, and confidence of the public, as Mike was saying. And as Craig said, I think this will be with us for a long time. I mean, I can't see myself going on public transport, for example, without a mask for a long time. I used to see people in London on the Underground wearing them, and I thought, oh, why are they wearing those? I will now wear one. What's the point of catching a cold or a flu or coronavirus or anything? And also, you know, when people go out, they're often going out with a mixed age group. They could be going out with children, older people. And so anyone who's booking the visit for the family or the, you know, the family group wants to feel secure that they're going to accommodation that's okay for the 90-year-old mother, and that they can book safely to a visit in a National Trust property, for example, or, you know, Aerospace Bristol, where they will be safe. So yes, I think it will have an impact. And I think, as you were mentioning, South Gloucestershire Council's been excellent on the wellbeing for staff. And I think that's an important factor for staff coming back out of wellbeing and for volunteers coming into the workplace again. That they're well aware of changes, and that there's really good communication within organisations about how they're to behave and exactly what the rules and regulations are at that particular time, be it arrows or, you know, things at reception. Yeah. So
I think what's interesting for our sector as well, though, is bars, clubs, and I mentioned theatres earlier, albeit that the seats, you can have a gap between couples and families. But I was thinking about bars and restaurants, about seating, but then I was also, whilst we were talking, thinking, well, what about the kind of club environments? You can't really, it's really difficult to kind of go to the dance floor and try and keep 2 meters from everybody who's trying to have a bit of a boogie in a club environment. And also you don't want to wear a face mask in a club, albeit that I suppose you could wear it if you're not drinking. It's those sorts of recovery elements that I'm laughing when I'm saying it, because I actually can't imagine what it's going to look like and how it could be true already.
well, we're going to have festivals. We're going to have festivals, aren't we?
Yeah.
Some festivals are going live. How will that be arranged?
We're all like sardines in tins usually in our environments, albeit outside events when they are an experience, you can socially distance with arrows and things like that. But certainly when it comes to socializing, and visitor economy is about people and social, and that will be a really interesting roadmap ahead, I think, certainly beyond the 21st of June. I guess at this stage, I just wanted to open the floor to the future, because we've talked really about the kind of here and now and the past, and it is difficult beyond the circumstances that we find ourselves in to really know what the future holds and how we'll manage recovery. But I just wondered if I go around the room, if there's anything anyone would like to say to any business owners out there in terms of maybe some reassurance, or perhaps messages around collaboration and some of the practices that you're discussing today. Any advice for anyone listening around kind of recovery and sticking with it and don't give up? I suppose that's what we've all been doing for the last year. Mike, what are your thoughts?
My thoughts are that businesses really need to react to the future, and actually, I know this is a phrase that's used a lot, is think outside of the box, in as much as there are things that they'll need to do to generate business that they aren't doing because things are different. I feel sorry for the people that don't have the outside space, because everything will revolve around outside space more and more. So I think with businesses, I think most of them are resilient. And my daughter is a small business owner with a cafe, and she reacts, and younger people have social media to work with to promote various things, home deliveries, all sorts of stuff that they can do that they aren't doing now to survive. And I'm convinced, with the good old British determination, that as a nation, we will put this behind us, and I think we will survive for the future, and things will be better. I'm really optimistic.
There's definitely an innovative theme and an adaptive theme coming through. I think we've all been through the journey of having to adapt, and certainly there's been even some innovation mentioned today, and that's something the sector's really had to learn. Going online, digital, it was for some of our B&Bers and being able to take away and deliver was certainly a revolution to the sector 12 months ago. And that should be things that we can stick with now. We've got online, we've made ourselves bookable, whether it's attraction tickets, innovation in the restaurant and the bars, be able to take away and deliver. I think that's certainly things that will be here to stay. Jane, your kind of roadmap ahead beyond the 21st of June, thoughts on
Well,
that?
I think the Insights Alliance says that visitors would be happy to pay for digital content, and I think that's an element that hasn't really been mined yet. And you know, conferences can be charged for, talks could be charged for. There's been a flowering amongst the heritage groups because they've been able to have talks on Zoom and have people coming in, instead of going out on a cold frosty night, they can sit at home together on the couch listening to a talk and actually see the slides clearly as well, instead of from the back of a village hall. So a lot of this will be sort of very positive, as you say, the digital elements. I think Heritage Open Days this year hopefully will be a sort of flowering. As I rang around the museums earlier this week and heritage sites, they all seemed to be tentatively making their plans and aiming to do something on Heritage Open Days, because it's way after the 21st of June. And I think keep fundraising in other ways, but I am optimistic about the future. I think everyone will be dying to get out there and enjoy themselves and see everything. I mean, I've got several things on my list that I definitely want to do that I haven't been able to do last year and this year, which entail a weekend away and to see a particular exhibition at a museum. And many people have seen The Dig, haven't they? And they'll want to go and see Sutton Hoo. It's all these sorts of things. And the Morn Warn, is it that the Stone Circle in Wales, which is a precursor to Stonehenge. There's a lot of exciting things for people to do, and so there's a lot to look forward to, I think.
Thank you, Jane. Craig, your perspective?
Outlook?
You seemed optimistic earlier. Still optimistic?
No, I'm always optimistic.
Good.
I think look, I agree with what crisis brings in a lot of ways is innovation, and we some of the best businesses in the world have come out of recessions, and I think what we're seeing now is just innovation on steroids, and it's really great to see. And I would encourage everyone to really explore every option, and you just have to do that. I think that the other thing that what this pandemic has accelerated is the whole movement to the experience economy, away from the sort of retail and material sort of focus to a real, actually value is in experiences. And I think and it's part of the innovation, but we're having to be more innovative about the experiences we bring to customers. And we really have to think about, how people are, they're choosing, their limited capacity is time. And how do we give them something really valuable in the time they've got available? So innovation around the experience economy is an exciting future, I think. And it's been a long-term trend before COVID, but it's really accelerated it. And I think the other trend that I'd pick up on is the trend towards health and well-being. And I think, it's pushed us to all get outside. It's pushed people to talk much more openly about mental health and the benefits that experiences and and things like that can give us. And we published a paper last year on blue health and mental health and what being in water and being around water and in green spaces can do for your mental health. And I think that's an important aspect for people to try and build into their experience, because it's becoming increasingly important. So there are lots of opportunities to explore as a business from any side. And I think that is, even if you are a small pub, you've got to try and think differently. It's unfortunate what's happened, but we've just got to think cleverly and creatively to try and drive a future that's exciting. And it is exciting. There is opportunity.
Definitely. Adam, final thoughts from you on recovery?
I think, like Mike said earlier about the visitors having to listen to visitors and the visitors guiding us on what they want, particularly in terms of safety, but in other areas as well. I think that's a key point, because obviously that will be what drives that innovation that we're talking about. Clearly, it's, you know, if the visitor, if the public, the customer wants a certain thing, you're going to have to find a way to adapt your business to deliver that. So I think it's, everyone over the last year has very much learned to do that, and hopefully one of the good things, as I was saying earlier, that comes out of it is that having to adapt and listening to the customer, and maybe even having a slightly better understanding of what visitors want. And I think a key point will therefore be continuing to listen, so that you can continue to adapt in the right ways, because it's very, very difficult to predict. You know, we talked about festivals and things like that, which, you know, I can totally see why people say, how are they going to work? My personal view is that actually if the rules go back to normal and you hold a festival in August and the rules back to normal, I personally think the festival will look exactly the same as it did in 2019, because I think people will just go back to normal. I think what Craig said about the guidance changing over time and that aspect lasting for years is definitely true, but I think the behaviours will quickly return to normal if they're allowed to. But the key is to observe that and listen to visitors so that you can react in the right way, because we can't possibly predict. I don't think anyone can.
No. So what would be really interesting is the next show for is in May, and I'd really like to ask if you'd like to join me again further down the roadmap in May to perhaps resume conversation and see where we stand in May. Craig will have already been opened. Some of us will be in the very early stages of opening by then, but I certainly think it would be really interesting to take a copy of today's conversation, and even in just a short space of time be able to look back and wonder from March where we are in May, and certainly as we head towards that 21st of June date, which is that sense of freedom, I think, for some. Be interesting to see how businesses are planning recovery, and those that have opened, what their experiences have been. And we'll start to capture very quickly from April the 12th visitor experience and expectation, and I think that will be something to perhaps discuss and may give us a bit more of an indication of recovery for the future in a bit more detail in May. So thank you for joining me today to talk about visitor economy, where we currently stand on the 4th of March 2021. So let's see how the road ahead looks, and thank you to everybody that joined us on the live stream viewing us today and taking part in the conversation. We'll be back with you again in May, so we look forward to seeing you then. So thank you to the panel, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks, everybody.
Cheers,
Thank you,
everyone.
Steve.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye. In May. So thank you for joining me today to talk about visitor economy.